This regime is dying. There's no question about it. And long before MI6 gets to install Zelensky as their chosen successor to Zelensky, this thing is going to be over. So the question is, what do you do if you're sitting in the White House? President Trump is very loath to stand up publicly and say, well, I guess I was wrong. I couldn't end this in 24 hours. I can't bring these people to the peace table. That's not going to happen. You're going to hear a lot of stupid crap about, well, President Trump tried his best, but President Putin lied to him. Well, that's all nonsense. That's just crap. Listen to what President Putin says over and over and over again. It has not changed over the last 36 months, frankly. And he's taken steps periodically to tell them exactly what the conditions are. Finally, there's this. What did we do after the Vietnam debacle? We stopped talking about it. Did you ever hear anybody stand up and say, well, I was right, but, things didn't work out quite that way. So, no, nobody does that. Generals don't stand up and say, I was wrong. Everything I predicted never happened. My assessments were wrong. You could start with General Paul Harkins back in 1963, go all the way through up to Fred Wyand at the end as the commander in Vietnam. Nobody does that. And I think what will happen is what we recommended, at least I recommended from the very beginning. President Trump, you want this to stop? We agree. Cease the delivery of all military aid immediately. Arrange for the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainians that need it and medical care and so forth through a third country. Get everyone who is an American citizen, whether they're in or out of uniform, whether they're intelligence or conventional military, it doesn't make any difference. All need to get out of Ukraine now. Do those things, and the Russians will then take you seriously because they'll recognize, the Americans have finally figured it out. We don't have any vital strategic interest in Ukraine. We never have. I mean, that's the simple truth. We wish everybody well, but we're not interested. This is an artificially created war. We created it with the help of our British friends and others in NATO. It needs to end. Only we can end it quickly. But you don't end it by presiding at some peace talk where everybody stands next to you and smiles and says, we love you, President Trump. You're such a great man. That's not going to happen. So just cut bait. Get out. You would think a businessman who has seen more than a few bad investments over many years would know when, that's it. We're going to take the loss and move on. We can't, let's not feed this loss anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Be done with it. That's what he needs to do. I think eventually that's what we will do. Because if you go down the road that's being charted by this General Donahue, you're going to destroy everything.
Well, here's the worry. You just a second ago, you said, the hope is that maybe saner heads can eventually prevail to come to the conclusions that you just mentioned here. But to the contrary, you have people emoting, as you said a second ago, also in the opposite direction. You mentioned earlier about the trolling, basically, that Medvedev did against Trump when he said the issue. Gary, if you can put that up there, where Medvedev said, the dead hand. No, not that one. The other one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, where he said, and about India's and Russia's dead economies entering very dangerous territory. Well, let him remember his favorite movies about the Walking Dead, as well as how dangerous the fabled dead hand can be. And that's where Trump interpreted, or else someone interpreted for him, that Medvedev was threatening nuclear war against the United States, which is not what the dead hand is. We'll just point that out, first of all. But in response, that's when Trump sent those nuclear subs publicly. As you said, he responded out of emotion to send something in, which is a signal that you're thinking more seriously about nuclear weapons. Well, if anyone was wondering what kind of reaction that would get from the group of people that like the Donahues and some others, we got that from Brother Jack Keane.
What Medvedev did here to precipitate the president's actions, it once again brandished the threat of nuclear weapons use. And believe me, this is a part of their instrument of national power. They use psychological warfare is how I would describe it. And they were quite successful in the Biden administration because as a result of threatening the use of tactical nuclear weapons, Biden restricted the use of our weapons. He held them back, long-range missiles, tanks, F-16s, to name a few. the Europeans were onto it, and they realized that this was a bluff, and we should stop submitting to that bluff and changing our behavior. And they forced the Biden administration to provide those items I just suggested. The Europeans, that is, because they were, in a sense, calling the Russians bluff. The president has heard this, and he wants them to know unequivocally that he's in charge here. He's not going to submit to this kind of intimidation and coercion and psychological warfare. And that is the message he is sending by announcing the deployment of 2 nuclear-powered submarines.
That's the message he's sending. So Putin is just bluffing, and Biden deserves condemnation because he was worried about nuclear war, but Trump is not, because he's tough, and that's what Putin's going to have to wonder. What does that tell you about where we're heading?
Well, I think we need to pause and point out, and I think Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson and others have done this, that the dead hand is simply a mechanism that ensures that if the Russians are a victim of first strike, and regardless of how much damage the first strike does, including kill them in great numbers, the dead hand is simply a mechanism that ensures that the Russians strike back with everything they've got. That's about it. So it's really a defensive mechanism. It's not an offensive one. So it's important to keep that in mind. The second thing, as we've said before, this is Medvedev. This is not Putin. President Trump should respond to other heads of state, not to people that are not heads of state, frankly. They don't matter. What matters is what the head of state says, the man who's actually in control. Now, the last bit of this is disturbing because Trump's personality is easily manipulated by people who are saying, well, if you do this, boss, you're going to be tough. And that's what Americans want. They want a tough guy out there to lay down the law and make it clear what we're not going to do and what they have to do. A lot of people in my generation that were involved in the Vietnam War, unfortunately, are very easily seduced by this. More than one person who was in Vietnam has said to me on several occasions, we got to be tough with these people. They're bad. We know them. We dealt with them before. Come on, this is not the Cold War. These people are not communists. They're Russians. And while there is always overlap, because underlying culture and national identity, ethnicity, religion, language, all those things always assert themselves and are always more important than any ideology. In this particular case, what they're being accused of and what is real are not the same thing, as you know, and as you pointed out. But this kind of thing very much appeals to the boomer generation, of which I'm a member. And I think Jack Keane exemplifies this. It's all about bullying somebody and being tough. Well, not really. This is about avoiding nuclear war, period, at all costs. It's about identifying real strategic interests, not imaginary interests. There is no interest on our part in what happens in eastern Ukraine, never has been. You could make an argument that we should have made it clear from the very beginning that at least the Dnieper River should be respected as a demarcation line beyond which we recommend the Russians not move. That could have been done early on, and that would have made sense. And I think the Russians feel that way in any case, because if they had wanted to cross that river, they could have done that much earlier than has happened. I mean, they just have refused to cross that river because they don't want Ukraine. They've never been interested in ruling Ukrainians. Anybody who knows the history knows the Western Ukrainians, knows the Poles, knows the Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. The Russians don't want to be bothered with those people. They're not fools. What they're trying to do is secure their country. And they want people to respect their legitimate national security interests. So this has nothing to do with being strong or bullying anybody. But I think President Trump is receptive to that message. It's not a good message. He shouldn't be. And again, it goes back to my earlier comment. Sometimes we won't have enlightened men at the helm, as pointed out by James Madison. So it's important that we have people in uniform, as well as people who are civilian appointees and elected to office, that will exercise a little more, let us say, balanced common sense.
Well, we can certainly hope that that occurs at some point, or even just self-interest. If it gets to any kind of critical point, will rule the day and prevent stupidity that could lead to catastrophic outcomes for our country.
And there's something else. There's one thing to also point out that everybody misses. We always have missile boats and attack subs at sea. That's probably arguably the most important strategic instrument at our disposal in terms of national defense. That's why I think our submarine fleet is too small and needs to be much larger and more capable.
Yeah.
Always have, and felt that should be our top priority. But we've always had those ships out there, those boats, rather. And those boats can attack Russia or anybody else very quickly from any number of locations. The second thing is the Russians have boats like that. And they too are off our shores. Who are we kidding? We need to wake up and understand that this is a very dangerous set of circumstances. Someone brought to my attention, I think it was 2010 or 2011, the people in Nome, Alaska were isolated. It had been a terrible ice storm, massive snows, worse than what you would normally expect. And we couldn't get any fuel oil to them. And so the Coast Guard finally said, listen, the only people that can get fuel to these people quickly are the Russians. And we asked the Russians to help. And they did. They sent a tanker in behind a Coast Guard icebreaker. And we were lucky to have that icebreaker because at the time, there were other icebreakers and they were all out of commission. Today, the Russians have the largest fleet of icebreakers in the world.
All right.
But my point is, we asked for help and assistance, and they gave it quickly and unhesitatingly, and they didn't gouge us on the price of the oil, which I can't emphasize enough. We got to get past this artificial conflict that has been created in Ukraine.